Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and this week our episode features a conversation I had with actually someone that I went to high school with, who we reconnected in Philly recently, and she has a pretty interesting PhD journey, and I'm excited for you guys to hear about it. So without further ado, here is Erica Boetefuer, PhD. Okay, let's do it. So Erica, tell me, where did this start? Where did your desire to get your PhD start? Was it all the way back in undergrad?
Sometime in undergrad, yeah. So I did undergraduate research at the University of Delaware when I was doing my bachelor's. Part of doing a Bachelor of Science at University of Delaware is doing undergraduate research and writing a thesis. Otherwise, you would get a Bachelor of Arts. So I think it's more broad, maybe geared towards like the med students, sort of the more liberal arts degree. So I did undergraduate research, and kind of through that process figured out what I wanted to do a little bit. I was kind of going pre-med, like keeping that option open, but I wasn't totally sure that that was the direction I wanted to go. I struggled a little bit with research in the beginning, but wound up enjoying it more and more as I got into it. And so the decision to do the PhD, I think, came mostly from wanting to open more doors and just kind of keep going with it. I wasn't, again, like totally sure what I wanted to do, and I did go right from undergrad into the PhD. So I was applying for PhD programs during my, actually, I think, beginning of senior year. I kind of forget the time frame.
Probably fall,
Fall of
probably
senior
first
year.
semester senior year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really struggled because it was such a huge commitment thinking about doing 5, 6 years. And, I talked to a lot of advisors and things like that, and some people did kind of say you can stop at the master's, to ease my fears a little bit. But I don't give up very easily, so I kind of knew like that's
Yeah.
what I was signing up for. But yeah, that's a little bit of the origin story.
So what was your undergraduate major?
So it was Bachelor of Science in Cell and Molecular Biology and Genetics. So when you did the Bachelor of
Oh,
Science, you
cool.
also picked sort of a focus or a concentration.
Okay, and that um was where you what that was the focus that you did your research in too?
Yeah, so my research was in Drosophila genetics, which is fruit flies. So I was
Fruit
studying
flies, I
some,
remember.
yeah, signaling transduction pathways in fruit flies, and I was trying to figure out how these two mutations within a gene caused kind of disruptions in downstream signaling. And so I learned a lot of Drosophila genetics and got kind of started with the different assays that you use for probing genetics in Drosophila.
At what point in the undergraduate program do they get you started with research?
Yeah, I started, so you can start early. And I think because
Mm-hmm.
I think I did declare this major pretty early, because you had to kind of start thinking about those classes and things to get the concentration. So you could start early. I don't think you would do it freshman year because I think you're still kind of getting settled. But I think I started talking about it in freshman year because my advisor, my like academic advisor, is actually who I wound up doing my research with.
Oh,
So we were
nice.
talking about it pretty early, and then I started sometime either during sophomore year or in the summer. I might have started a little bit in spring of sophomore year just to kind of show up in the lab and start learning a little bit, but I think really dove in summer of sophomore year. Well,
Okay.
summer
But you
between,
don't sophomore and junior year.
yeah, I think so. And the
Yeah.
time frame
Yeah.
is a little tough.
I know it feels like so long ago,
Yeah.
right? So sorry to harp on this. I'm just so interested in the fact that it was part of your program so that you got credits for doing research.
Yes, yeah. So I took maybe one less class than some other people
Mm,
because it was a full like 3 credit class. Yeah, well, the
cool.
equivalent of a class. Yeah.
Yeah. What what were your so you said that you struggled with research in the beginning. I mean, I think anyone would. It's kind of like an outside concept, you know how to take class, you know how to do homework, but like research is kind of another whole
Yeah.
animal. So can you talk a little bit about that experience if you remember?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I part of Part of it, yeah, I'm trying to even remember like what the struggle was. I think it's just, yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, that it's like I was good at classes. You show up at class, they
Yeah.
teach you, and not to jump ahead to another question I know you're going to ask, but like one of the challenges with grad school is this same question that you're asking now, that the classes really they identify what they're going to teach you, they teach it to you, and then they test you on it. Whereas research and grad school is you have to figure out what you need to learn. You have to mostly learn it on your own, other than help from your mentor and people that are teaching you in the lab. And then you don't really get tested on it in any formal way, other than qualifiers in your defense. But like you get tested in sort of other ways that are a lot more abstract, I think, than like the formality of classes. So that was probably the transition actually that I didn't identify like that was the challenge early. I identified that more
Yeah.
in grad school. But I think that
Yeah.
was probably a part of it.
Okay, last question about this. Do you think your grad school experience was um benefited from you having undergraduate research experience?
Yeah, definitely. Because
Okay.
I, even going into graduate school with undergraduate research experience, I felt pretty lost. And I think part of that is
Mm.
just going right from undergrad into grad school without any gap or like other life experience. I was a little bit prepared just because I was in an undergraduate research lab that had graduate students. But I still don't think I really totally knew what I was getting into. So I think without the undergraduate research experience, that would have been like even more overwhelming. I think like I understood what it was to, kind of have my own project and do the lab work to get through a project and things like that. So I think it was definitely beneficial.
Nice. Okay, so let's move to grad school. So, well, let's move to the decision. So you decide to go to grad school, you're applying, you're still like wrapping up your undergrad. I went through the same experience. It was quite a busy year
Yeah.
of applying, and also I had a thesis, same thing.
Yeah.
Um, so were you looking at specific programs, specific research labs? What was your kind of focus there?
I did not, and I wish that I had. Again,
Okay.
I think I kind of didn't fully understand what I was getting into. So I applied to mostly generic like biology programs, a couple umbrella programs, typically in PhDs for biology. There's an umbrella that has a couple different graduate groups underneath of it. And most
Mm.
of those, I would say, in my experience, were associated with a med school. Um, and then something else that I was looking for was the ability to do teaching assistant positions. Um,
Oh,
and
cool.
so actually, I wound up finding that the umbrella programs were a little bit overwhelming. But I wanted again to like keep my options open and keep the doors open. So when I was applying, I honestly can't even remember like how I picked the schools that I applied to. I would
I can't either. I was trying. Someone asked me the other day. I was like, I think I applied to 4 or 5 schools. Couldn't tell you why.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember. I do remember a couple things. I remember going to UNC. The main campus is at Chapel Hill. Um, um, Cleveland. Oh my goodness, Case. Is it, no,
Case
Case
Western.
Western. Is that
Yeah,
right? I think it
it's in
was
Cleveland.
Case
Yeah.
Western. Maybe one in California. Basically, they were all pretty far away. And just kind of the memories that I have of where I did interview was I one in Boston too. Um, Case Western, I really fell in love with these professors. There was an RNA research group there, and I absolutely love them. Like their research was so interesting. It was actually a married couple that like shared a joint office, and they often co-advised
Oh,
students. But the RNA group in general was really interesting, and I got along just so well with everyone. Was really excited about what they were doing. And then so it was kind of between that and Penn. University of Chapel Hill was one of those umbrella programs that I just felt very overwhelmed by, and also going to UNC was a lot different, like atmosphere compared to what I was used to. I went to University of Delaware for undergrad and kind of lived up in the Northeast. It felt like a lot of people were like getting married and having kids right away and buying
yeah.
houses. It was just a really different experience. But and again, that umbrella program you were talking about going in with like 75 students and having to pick within those programs. So yeah, and then the other option was Penn, which I applied to the biology department, which is part of the College of Arts and Sciences. And again, part of the reason behind that was that I did want to do a teaching assistant position because I didn't get the chance to do that in undergrad because they said I need to focus on my research. Uh, so, so the biology department is quite a bit smaller than a lot of other departments. I don't maybe 20 to 30 professors. But you can do one rotation outside of the biology department, so at least like I had that door open in case that was something that I wanted. So it kind of gave me the confidence that like even though it wasn't the umbrella program, I would still have options in case I didn't wind up, finding the right fit in the smaller department. And so, yeah, so going back to the decision between Case Western and Penn, even though I really loved the professors at Case Western and I didn't really have that identified at Penn, um, it was kind of like I have this opportunity to go to Penn. It's also local. I'm from near Philadelphia, and I didn't really love. I mean, Cleveland was actually a lot nicer than I expected. It has a bad reputation, I'm sure, but I think it
Yeah,
would have been fine. I just felt like more at home in Philadelphia and like
sure.
figured I would have, as many opportunities here as Case Western. I definitely do still think of those professors at Case Western though. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Very cool. So two follow-up questions to that. One was, oh shoot, I lost them. You were talking about, oh, so you said you had one rotation outside of biology. Was that in the like first year where you're rotating around labs?
Yeah, so in my program, and I think this is pretty typical, you do 3 rotations, and they're about 8 weeks, and you do this in your first year. So in my department, your first year was most like we had a full load of classes. I think a lot of other
Yeah.
schools only have maybe 1 or 2 classes, and you do focus more on your rotations. Um, but I had an entire full load of classes, and we did 3 rotations during the first year. So my first 2 were within the biology department, and then while I was in my first semester, I took epigenetics as a class. And one of the professors from actually the med school came to give a guest lecture, and I really enjoyed her lecture. I was already really loving epigenetics. That class was so great. It was the first time I ever taught it, brand new, and it was a great class. But
Hmm.
she came to give a guest lecture. I loved her research. I really enjoyed her talk. So she's the one that I talked to that was outside of the biology department for my 3rd rotation, and that's the lab that I wound up joining. Yeah.
Wow. Well, isn't it a good thing that you went to some place where you could, you know, go outside of your
Yeah,
department?
I'm really glad
That's
they
very
give
cool.
that flexibility, give you the options because your PhD really is your journey, and I think it's good that they gave us those options.
Especially too, because I feel like there's so many grad school disciplines that aren't necessarily undergraduate majors. And so, like, you as a biology undergraduate degree holder are obviously applying to biology graduate programs, but you may be interested in something outside of that, but tangential to it, and you might actually bring a lot of, knowledge and stuff to a more interdisciplinary topic.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, especially now in like my career of there's just so many jobs out there that I have no idea or like we just don't even know that what exists out there. And
Yeah.
so even this epigenetics, I had learned about it kind of briefly in a couple of my bio classes in undergrad, but didn't know that much about it and that it was like a whole field. I mean, it is a newer field, but it was, really exciting to get into a new field and it was all because of that class.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's very cool. Okay, and then my other question was you mentioned that you were interested in a teaching assistantship experience. Was that primarily because you were still sort of like wanting to see how you liked that aspect of it, academia?
Yeah, I maybe it was again part of keeping doors open because, like, for a very brief moment going into undergrad, I thought maybe I would do secondary education and teach biology because we had some great high school biology teachers, some of which we might
Yes,
have
we
shared.
did.
And
Yeah.
so I did think about that briefly, but then I wasn't totally sure and also realized that that meant if you do that job, you would be a little bit more locked into like your degree leads to only secondary education, which I know is not totally true. You can probably do other things with it, but so part of the decision, again, back to that was like just keeping doors open. I'm probably going to say that way too many times. But
Hey, I need to pull a quote from this for my Instagram post later in the week. So that'll be my
oh,
quote, will
cool.
be to keep the doors
Right, yeah.
open.
Or
Um,
open more doors.
Open more doors.
Yes.
Yeah, so
So,
okay, so that's interesting. What did you think about the teaching experience that you had?
yeah. So, just to jump back for a second. So the teaching, I think I just wanted to try it. I think I
Hmm.
like teaching and mentoring kind of in general, but I never had the opportunity to do it in undergrad. I don't know at the time if I was considering staying in academia or if that happened later. So I think I might have also wanted to be like, let me try this. So I can test it out. And if I do want to stay in academia, become a professor, I have that experience. So I just like knew that I wanted to try it. And then as far as how it went, I really did love it. It was a great experience. I did some of the undergrad intro biology where you get to do the lab class. It's a big time commitment,
Hmm.
but it was a lot of fun. I wound up teaching a lot more than I wanted to, so this was one of the downsides to the program that I chose, or just kind of how things worked out. I wound up teaching for 6 semesters, so 3 full years of my PhD out of 6, which turned out to
Wow.
be a lot. It was mostly for
Yeah.
funding reasons and another reason that I'm sure we'll get into. Um, and so I did really love it. A couple classes were not as good as other ones, but I really like the intro bio classes, like those ones that comes with the lab. The labs are so much fun. The students are way less stressed out. And then I also really liked getting to teach towards the end of my degree the upper level classes. So I actually got to TA that epigenetics class that I fell in love with
Oh,
initially,
cool.
which was so much fun. And then another epigenetics like grad level kind of seminar course towards the end. Yeah.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, I could see you being a good TA, a good teacher to have. Because not everyone has that skill and that interest, and so, but it's also about prioritizing your time. And as a grad student, you have a million things to do, so I can see why that would have kind of been um, a bit of a a draw on your already limited energy,
Yeah, it was
right?
tough. And then actually making the decision to leave or to not pursue academia, I was a
Mm.
little bit afraid that I would miss the teaching side of it. And I'm still, you know, I guess I do miss it. Like it was fun. I do really enjoy it. What I kind of told myself was you'll have hopefully mentorship opportunities in the future, like, being a manager to people in your group and things like that. So I'm kind of hoping to fill that little bit of the passion that I have for that with kind of other things in my job, even though it's not like teaching a class.
Formal, yeah, yeah, that's great. I love that outlook. Um, okay, so let's jump ahead now. So you've decided on Penn, you're in graduate school, and you now have chosen this epigenetics research
Yeah,
lab. So, what was your research in specifically?
yeah. So I studied.
This is my favorite part because I get to learn so many things, and then I tell you to simplify them after you
I was
tell
gonna
me.
say
So go
this
ahead.
is your favorite part and the most difficult part for probably everyone on your podcast because we have to
Hmm.
figure out what to talk about in a short amount of time. So I studied a human early aging disorder called Cockayne syndrome, Cockayne. And this
Cool.
disease is caused by a mutation within a chromatin remodeler, which are the proteins that control how DNA is wrapped around these other proteins called histones. And this is basically how your DNA is packaged into cells and also controls gene expression. And so this, I was essentially trying to figure out why this mutations within this protein that caused this disease cause such severe effects. So I'm kind of trying to figure out like what this protein does when the result of it
Mhm.
is early aging disorder. So the patients only live to be about 12 years old. They look physically older. They have skin sensitivities and kind of like muscle wasting. And it's a very severe disease caused by mutations within this one protein. So what we did know about it when I was going into it is that it's the very first protein recruited to sites of UV DNA damage, which is caused by sun rays, and this is part of causing skin cancer and also aging. And so this is a really interesting connection. Okay, so we have this understanding that this protein helps with DNA damage repair after sun damage. But how does it cause all of these other severe, like such a severe phenotype, if that's only visible at the surface, so in your skin? And so what I wound up figuring out throughout my PhD, and of course with the help of the rest of my group, is that we sort of learned how it's getting targeted to DNA, because it doesn't have this specific targeting sequence, which directs some other chromatin remodelers like to specific places in DNA. We found out that it's getting targeted by other things that do have those targeting sequences, such as transcription factors. And so we found out essentially that it's helping, so it's getting targeted by these other proteins, and it essentially what we found out is that it plays a role in transcription regulation, which again is how genes are regulated, and then also DNA repair. So a big part of my research was finding out that it likely participates in different types of DNA repair in addition to the UV DNA repair that I was talking about in the beginning.
Interesting. So I'm going to try this thing where I see if I understand. So you said you knew what protein was causing the disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Going into
Yeah,
it.
it's called.
But you were trying to figure out what that protein does outside of the disease causing for the body, or
Kind of
did I get
like
that
within
wrong?
the disease, so like half right. So we were
Okay.
trying to figure out like why mutations within this protein, which disrupt the protein, cause the disease. So we know that the mutations within that there's a couple of proteins, but CSB, Cockayne syndrome protein B, is the one that I was studying.
Oh.
So it was identified at the same time as the disease was identified. So we knew already that mutations within that protein caused this disease. What we were trying to understand is basically like when the protein's functioning normally, what is it doing that is essentially preventing this early aging disease and all of the severe phenotype that comes along with it. So it's kind of like how you learn about the aging process and the other things that it affect by studying this mutation.
Interesting. Huh. Wow, that's crazy. I don't do biology, but it's very cool. I mean, I don't do biology. That was a great sentence. So did you is this something that your your group focuses on primarily, or is this just a sub project in a bigger set of projects?
My PI, principal investigator, so the leader of the lab, came from a lab, one of the top, there's not many, it's a very rare disorder, only about, I forget, 1 in 200,000 patients, so it's a very small number around the world. But my advisor came from a lab, one of the top labs studying this disease. And so that was a major focus of the lab. Everything kind of rotated around this disease. There was sort of like my side of the project focusing on this, and then she also had another protein that she was studying. So sort of different protein pathways a little bit, but I think mostly focusing on this disease was her main.
Same disease.
Yeah.
That's cool. And what was your research group like? Was it in size? Did you have many grad students? Did you have postdocs, undergrads? What was the...
So I was the first and only grad student of this lab. So it was very small.
Amazing.
The advisor. We had a research assistant professor, or like a more senior scientist. One postdoc for most of the time I was there, or at least the first 3-4 years. And then we didn't manage to recruit any more grad students, so I was the only one the entire time that I was there, and we wound up being around like 3 or 4 the whole time. We had a couple graduate student rotation students come through and undergraduate student rotations come through, which I mentored most of with the help of the postdoc.
Wow. What I can't even imagine. What was that like? You're the only grad student. Like, did you like that?
It was great in the beginning because I got a publication out of my rotation project. So it was very productive because she's a new professor. I'm the first grad student. So like we really hit the ground running, and it was really exciting for the, beginning, but maybe this is a good time to get into. So the lab was not growing. And towards the end of my 3rd year, I think I found out that she did not get tenure. So what
Oh,
this means in academia is that you basically lose your job. And so I think that this was part of, another thing that I didn't totally understand when I was like, I knew what the tenure process was, but I don't think I understood the potential implications when I joined that lab. I was just really excited about it and dove in. And I don't think I regret it. I guess I wish maybe I had been a little bit more informed in the beginning, but it was really exciting. But then yeah, after that third year, I think third year it was a little bit rough and I didn't know why, but I think it was because she was going through that like an appeal process but wasn't talking about it, which I can understand. It's a really difficult time.
yeah.
Um,
And it's a lot of work. They have to put together this whole like tenure packet and
yeah, yeah.
it's
Yeah, so I didn't really know a lot of what was going on. And in retrospect, like I wish she had been more transparent because it's part of a process that if I had stayed in academia, like I would be going through. So I wish I
true.
knew kind of more about what was going on. And then also, when things weren't going well, to find out why almost a year later. Not going well. They just weren't, the first 3 years were like really exciting and things were going great. And then it kind
Yeah.
of took a little bit of a turn. So after my fourth year, she moved and I made the
Hmm.
decision to stay behind and finish up instead of moving with her.
Okay.
So yeah, kind of this led out of a question I think about the lab size and essentially like, the
Yeah.
lab didn't grow larger. Like it would have definitely been nicer to have more people around and more people to learn from and grow the lab size. We had a decent amount of funding, but I think obviously not as much as I'm not sure if that was tied to the funding, the reason it wasn't growing, but I don't know. It has definitely advantages and disadvantages. Like being in a smaller lab, you get a lot more attention and you
Mhm.
get, to work maybe across more projects because you're all working really closely together. But I think the downside is like minimizing your like potential people to learn from or to teach because there's just not anybody
Sure.
else around.
Yeah. No, it's true, and it's something that, when I talk to people who are interested, I tell them to think about ahead of time, like how they like to work and do they like to be in an environment where it's like maybe slightly more competitive because there's 10 grad students, but also there's people around,
Yeah.
and people are different.
Yeah. I
So,
would say I think a medium-sized lab is probably the happy middle.
yeah. Yeah. So you made the decision to stay. So I knew someone when I was in grad school whose professor left for different reasons, but he went with him, and that was a challenge in itself because he was suddenly now a grad student at a different university, and they didn't really think of him the same way as they did their students, and it was sort of awkward for him. What was sort of the fallout from your experience?
Yeah, I wasn't worried about that at all. I actually would have been happy to go with her from that perspective. It was New Mexico, so it would have been a move, but I was kind of like, well, maybe that's something cool and different.
Sure.
The decision to stay was that I was in my fourth year, and so hopefully at the time was hoping only one more year away from being done. And if you move to a new
Yeah.
lab, you really can probably expect about a year of like setup time, just to kind
Yeah.
of get things back up and running. And so that felt like it was going to delay things. And at the time, I was pretty unhappy because
Mm.
of just the challenges that came up with
All of
this.
it.
So it was a really difficult decision. A lot of help from my thesis committee went into making that decision. But I
Yeah.
think, I mean, again, I think it would have been an interesting like adventure to go if I were still happy in the lab. But I think the way that things went with this process, I wasn't super happy, and so I was getting ready to be done and to get out and finish up.
I'm glad to hear that your thesis committee was helpful because I feel like that's not technically in their job description to like talk you like they don't normally talk a student through this type of decision, right? It doesn't happen very often. So that's great because I love the idea of there being, a thesis committee that's invested in your success as well, right?
Yeah, that was really helpful and probably the only reason I was able to finish and like successfully defend. My thesis committee wound up being really excellent and really helpful through this, and I don't think everybody gets that from their committee either, which because you have I forget even how many meetings you're supposed to have, but I was meeting with them almost there was a point in time where it was like once a month for 6 months. Like
That's
people don't
great.
usually get that much attention from their committee. So yeah, I felt really supported, and I think also sometimes it can feel very like as a grad student that you're not supported by I don't know, by the school or just by the kind of industry of it. It feels like you're just kind of like thrown into a lab and then, good luck. So I
Yeah.
did feel some of that initially, but then yeah, I think the thesis committee was really what made me feel supported through that process. So pick your committee
That's
wisely.
cool. Yeah, for sure. Um, and then so did you have to finish up your research in like a related lab that had the equipment you needed and stuff?
Yeah, so luckily I was on a shared floor. So I was in the Smilo Translational Research Center at University of Pennsylvania, and it's
Oh, I've driven by the
yeah,
sign.
you can't really see it anymore though. It's blocked by all the new buildings. Crazy
Yeah.
around there. And it was pretty new when I got there. So this building has all the labs have open floor plans. So it's the entire floor just has bay after bay after bay after bay. And there's a lot of rooms with shared equipment. So luckily, I had a lot of what I needed. I did kind of pseudo join the lab next to me, which they were super welcoming and supportive. I had been working right, literally the bench next to them the entire time, so I
Yeah.
knew them very well. But the PI of that group was again super supportive. So I did like use their cell culture room and ask a lot of. I got a lot of help from people on the floor too, which was really great. Because I think something else that's interesting that some of the silver linings that came out of this situation was that I think being a new professor, or she wasn't super new, but going through the tenure process, you really need to prove yourself as an independent researcher. And so I felt like we did have some collaborations, but I almost felt like we shouldn't talk to other lab groups as much because we're trying to like prove ourselves independently. But after she left, I talked to everybody and it was awesome. And so I
Oh,
wish I
wow.
had done that earlier because like I learned so much from other postdocs on the floor and just even as simple as asking to use a piece of equipment. Like I learned so many things through the people that I got to talk to. So that was, one thing that kind of came out of it. So yeah, I got lucky to answer your question that the floor was an open floor. I had a lot of the stuff that I needed, but it still took me a couple months because a lot of the stuff that I needed was gone and things just stopped working all of a sudden because I was like I remember the first day that she left that I did an experiment. I walked something like 17,000 steps around the building it was a long day, but like just trying to run around and find all the things that I needed. So it was definitely a frustrating transition, but somehow got things done. She did have to help her and the research scientists finishing up some experiments that I was not able to do myself. So
For your like
yeah,
dissertation.
exactly. Yeah, and in the
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds very
That
stressful,
was a
but
lot.
yeah, but I mean, like you said, I love that you're able to kind of pick out the positives that came out of it, and also that you know, I mean, I'm sure looking ahead into like interviewing and stuff like that kind of people love to hear stories like that where you like overcame some difficult thing. So, I don't know if that's was your experience, but
Yeah,
I remember getting asked that all the
yeah,
time.
it came up a few times.
Yeah. Um, well, speaking of which, well, let's see. Is that all I want to ask about? Mm, yeah, we'll get back to the rest of those questions, but I want to find out what happened. So 6 years, um, right? So 2018.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
good math.
Yeah.
Um, 2018. So we're not in COVID yet. So now what? What happens after you graduate? Were you looking for jobs towards the end of your wrap up time?
I was not too much because at the end of my wrap up time, I was writing my paper, writing a review paper, and writing my thesis, like all in that last semester. I mean, that's most of what I did the last couple months, but like I was doing all of those things at once. Um, so I just didn't have the maybe time or brain space to really dedicate to it.
Yeah.
And so luckily I came across or really kind of fell into my lap an opportunity to do medical writing. I saw the email.
More writing.
What? More writing. I know.
More
Yeah,
writing.
ironic, right? Well, and we'll talk about this too. Medical writing is not as much like sit down and write, the way that you think of writing a thesis or a paper as it is doing a lot of other cool things. But some of it's actually writing. But yes, went from writing to more writing. So yeah, through a friend, got introduced to this medical writing group. And I was a little has no, I don't even want to say that. I took it on as a transition. So I
Okay.
wasn't totally sure that that was the career that I wanted. It was not something that I had honestly thought about. I really thought I would go be a scientist in industry somewhere because I think we didn't
Mhm.
totally get like cover this, but that whole experience really turned me off from academia. So I knew for sure, like through
Sure.
that experience, that I wanted to go into industry. So I hadn't really been thinking about medical writing, but that opportunity really fell into my lap and I was really excited about it. And I wanted to try something different. I wanted to give myself a little bit of a break, maybe, and also give myself some time to figure out what I wanted to do as far as going into a scientist position. Um, and what else was I going to say about that? So I decided to start part time. I did start almost directly after I finished, which I definitely should have taken a bit more of a break, but I was like, it's part time, it'll be fine. But take a
Yeah.
break after you defend. I literally started like that next Monday, and yeah, but it was
Yeah.
great. So and the other reason that I took the medical writing job was because I wanted to get into cancer research, or something
Hmm.
cancer related, and since all of my graduate research was on that early aging disease. I didn't really have a lot of experience in cancer, and also was getting really into it when I was maybe looking for postdoc positions. That was something else that I was kind of like toying around, but really casually, but turned away from when I made that decision not to go into academia. I think if I had found something really cool and a good opportunity, I would have, but I was definitely probably scared just to go through that experience again.
Yeah.
Like I would have chosen a professor who had tenure. I didn't want to do that again, but I think I was a little, yeah, turned away from that at the moment. So yeah, I wanted to get into cancer work, and it was a cool opportunity. So I took that part time initially. Um, for a couple months. I also traveled a bit in there, so even though I didn't get the break right away, I did get some traveling in. I actually went to Peru for what was supposed to be 3 weeks and then turned into 3 months, going down to Chile and Argentina. And I was able to still be
Wow.
working a little bit remotely, part time. Well, part time basically while I was there. So that was a
That's like
really
that's like a plot of a movie, you like they go on vacation for 3 weeks and then 3 months later they're still there. Love that.
yeah. My
That's
family
great.
didn't love it so much, but my aunt was with me and literally we're like hanging out in Lima, waiting like killing time before we go literally to the airport. And I was like, I don't want to go home. So I
Ah,
like called my parents and called my boss, and I was like, I think I'm gonna stay. Is that okay? And change my flight.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. How ballsy. I love that.
It's one,
I feel like that's pretty common with like someone who's been in school for their whole life. You're just like, I need more of a break.
yeah. And I had traveled a bit before. I did study abroad in undergrad for Spanish in Panama, and then I did a actually research rotation between undergrad and grad school at Imperial College in London. So I was in London during the 2012
Oh,
Olympics, doing some math there
wow.
too. So that was really exciting. So yeah, I love traveling, and I'm so glad I got to take that opportunity because I also went by myself initially, and that was scary, but I
Yeah,
just wanted to try it, and I wound up meeting so many people when I was there, and that's what also like helped with the decision to stay. So this
that's
is taking
awesome.
a turn from my science experience to some travel.
I know, but it's great. It's all good advice.
Yeah,
It's
travel.
all
I
good
definitely
advice.
recommend traveling if you can.
So that was while you were part-time science
Yeah,
writing,
and then
right?
I came back. I had to come back and go back to reality. So I came back towards the end of December, celebrated the holidays, took a break, and then I started applying in the new year. And I was actually then at that point working full time,
Okay.
and applying for jobs. So now I was looking in for scientist jobs in pharma mostly, but just kind of anything that sounded interesting. I did have some contacts, like referrals, that I started with in
Mhm.
January. And I did not get any interviews for like 3 full months, even though I had referrals. And then all of a sudden
Wow.
I got like a bunch of interviews in March, April, May. They just kind of started rolling in. So my theory on this, and I've talked to a couple of people, there might be kind of a season to hiring
Yeah.
in pharma or kind of biotech industry. I'm not sure if this is still true after COVID, so maybe ask around if people are applying for jobs. But that was my experience that January Q1 was not a big time to hire. And then again, just the fact that I got several interviews going into Q2 sort of set off some
Yeah.
alarm bells. So so yeah, I started getting interviews. I didn't apply for a ton of jobs. We're talking in like handfuls, not like tens, 20s, 30s, or
Right.
total. But um, I interviewed a couple, and I did not get a couple jobs, and I some of it I think was just experience. So I think I was competing with a lot of people that had postdocs. So that was a little bit of a scary experience. I was like, oh, did I make the right experience, the right choice here? Because I, at that point, really didn't want to go back. But eventually I did get this job and kind of hopefully get a foot in the door in industry. And this will be my sort of replacement postdoc experience, I'm hoping at least.
Yeah. Um, what can you tell us about this job that you have now?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk a
I don't
little?
know how much of it
Do
is
you
go
want me
ahead.
to talk a little
Go
bit
ahead.
about the medical writing job before we go into this job? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
just
What was that
Yeah,
like?
let me
Yeah.
just say a couple things because I said I really liked it, but I'll tell you just a little bit about it. So medical writing job, just briefly, it's a great job. I really loved it. It was fully remote even before the pandemic. But a lot
Oh,
of my coworkers were local, so we'd sometimes meet up and like work in coffee shops. This is a very
that's
like
awesome.
pre-pandemic thing to say. um, but it is a really great job, great career. I loved the people that I worked with. And this medical writing company we were mostly contracted out by pharmaceutical companies. So I mentioned it's not all writing. Some of the jobs I think can be like you can be a medical writer and help like write papers and grants and things like that. This job was more focused on, or just the jobs that I wound up doing. It was all cancer related, but we made materials like brochures, websites, a lot of like training materials. So
Mm.
some of the pharmaceutical companies like train nurses and there's this thing called a KOL, a key opinion leader, and they'll go out to these physicians and try to get sort of gather their knowledge about, say they're about to launch a drug in this field. Like, what are the physicians approaching or prescribing in that disease area? So
Oh.
it was a really interesting way to learn a lot and get to interact with these pharmaceutical companies. It's a great like I had pretty good work-life balance, and it pays pretty well if you're in the pharmaceutical side of things, I think. So yeah,
Mhm.
just want to kind of shout out
Yeah,
medical writing.
so the pharma yeah, so the pharma company would contract your firm out to like put together these brochures for their drugs, for example,
Yeah, it could be for their drugs. I mean, generally the pharmacy.
or
Yeah,
like for a disease or
exactly.
something.
Yeah, it's all related to
Yeah.
whatever drugs they're working on. A lot of one thing that I did a lot of was clinical trial analyses. So,
Oh.
trying to understand the market of what other drugs are either available or in clinical trials for whatever specific disease or disease indication that they're looking into. So, if they have a drug in a clinical trial for X, what else is out there for X and
Like
such? Yeah, I think
competitors.
it's kind of like a marketing approach, and also just a research approach of okay, like what else is available.
Yeah. Very cool. Did you have to read scientific papers a lot?
Um, Not as much as I expected. Sometimes, yes,
Oh,
but I was reading a lot
okay.
of clinical trials. Like so, yes,
Hmm.
the all of the readouts of clinical trials mostly were of papers. So I did read a lot of those. But then I also made a lot of background material. So I did a lot of lymphoma work, for example. So we would do kind of background slides on the different lymphomas. And so there I was
Ah.
reading like I guess review papers and kind of more like background material type things. Sometimes the pharmaceutical companies had materials that I would then kind of like process. Medical writing is a lot about like turning one material into like communicating it in a very like clear, concise way in another material. So
For like a different audience
yeah,
or
yeah,
or
towards audience.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're teaching biology is what you're telling me, right? Because
Yeah.
there's your teaching right there.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
Um,
Yeah, a big project that I was doing was teaching. We were making the PowerPoint decks for clinical nurse consultants, which go out and teach nurses. So like I wasn't doing the teaching, but I was making the slides.
yeah,
So
okay.
yeah,
So the at-home
yeah,
work of a teacher,
yeah,
right, is building the materials. Very cool. Very cool.
yeah. So it's a great job,
Um,
and just to kind of wrap this up, the reason I could totally see myself doing that job, long term. The thing that I didn't like about it was that I was always reporting on other people's work, and I wanted to be the one doing the work.
yeah.
So it was I wanted
You got the research
yeah,
bug. You
exactly.
wanted to be in the lab making new
Yeah,
things and
I
discovering
wanted to be
things,
writing
right?
about, like, what I was doing or, like, what my group was doing, and yeah, so that was the decision to kinda move on from that experience.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So you moved on and now you're somewhere else doing science?
I am. Well, as much as I can, because I work for a startup. So I have a lot of different
Mm.
jobs, and getting to the bench is becoming less and less of it, but I'm
Oh
trying to
no.
keep that in there. Yeah, so I work for a startup that was founded by a professor at Penn, which is not exactly how I got the job, but I think it helped because I got the job
Yeah.
through just applying on LinkedIn. But I think it definitely helped that I had, connections there. Some of which I have actually like seen people again. So, for example, my second rotation was in an exosome lab. Sorry, I didn't even say this yet, but the company that I'm working for is extracellular vesicles, or exosomes is one type of extracellular vesicle. And so my second rotation was like in this field, just by coincidence,
At
like
Penn.
wound up, yeah, at Penn. And so like I've interacted with that professor many times since then. That's not the professor that
Wow.
founded the company, but it's just, kind of that small world thing. Okay,
Mhm.
so the company we're developing a novel liquid biopsy based or blood based diagnostic technology for cancer and other diseases.
Okay.
Okay, so I can kind of give some details on how we're doing that. So the core of the technology is a microfluidic or nanofluidic chip. So my company is called. Should I say the company? Is that do
Yeah.
people?
Well, sure. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess it's fine. I don't see why not. But yeah, I mean, you can Google my name and you're gonna find it
You can
anyway.
Google you. Yeah, it's right
I
there.
am
Yeah.
very Googleable. I think I'm the only Erica Boetefuer in the entire country. So
Yeah, there you
anyway,
go.
so my company is called Chip Diagnostics, and so the chip is the core
Yeah.
of the technology. It's a microfluidic chip. Um, and essentially what we're doing is we're trying to capture subpopulations of extracellular vesicles. So extracellular vesicles are these particles that are released by all cells in the body, and they contain information such as proteins and nucleic acids. And essentially, they're part of the signaling network in the body. So they allow communication between cells. Initially, they were thought of as just trash cans, but essentially, we're learning that they're a lot more than
Huh.
that. And the connection to diseases is that they may they play a role in disease like progression, for example, in metastasis. So they can kind
Mm.
of like seed um, new sites of metastases. And for diagnostic purposes, essentially what we do is we're trying to isolate subpopulations of those vesicles that contain information that we can use to diagnose a disease state. And so what we do is if, for example, we're interested in trying to diagnose lung cancer, we would try to isolate the vesicles that are coming from the lung tumor. And
Okay.
then we compare a healthy patient population to a lung cancer patient population, and we look for signals within these vesicles that differentiate the two diseases. The two
Mhm.
populations. And we use machine learning or artificial intelligence to do that, which is not my area of expertise, but I'm excited to be learning some of it at this company.
Mhm.
But yeah, I feel like
Okay, so questions. So it with the lung cancer, the tumor that's on the lung that you're sort of collecting from, is that um uh cancerous for sure, or is that what you're trying to answer?
Yeah, so the way that we do the studies, so it's not in clinical trials yet. We've done what we call clinical
Oh, okay.
studies. So we've done almost 500, well, the company plus the lab that founded. Most of the core work has been done by the lab at Penn. Um,
Mhm.
so they've done over, I think, somewhere around 500 patients at this point. And so the way that they design the clinical study is you take a healthy patient population and a known disease state population.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
so when they're developing the diagnostic, there's a part that's blinded. We call it a test set, so that we can test how well the diagnostic works. But like somebody knows the answer.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And the diagnostic is this chip, right? So the chip,
Yeah. So
no,
yeah, I don't think I did as well of a job as explaining this, but the
the,
so there's
it's late at night. It's fine.
it's okay. There's so there's hardware. So the chip itself is part of the hardware, and then
Yeah.
there's the diagnostic, which is kind of like the interpretation of the downstream. So I'll explain like how like the process I think will make it make more sense. So we have the chip, which is a microfluidic chip, and it has these membranes on it, which have nanometer size pores. And the reason this is important is because extracellular vesicles are nanometer size. So we're basically matching that size. And what we do is we label the vesicles that we're interested in. So again, for the lung cancer example, we would try to isolate vesicles that are coming from the lung tumor. So you use these surface markers that are on the vesicles to try to specifically identify that population. So basically we label proteins on the surface of the vesicles with antibodies. And then we
Mhm.
flow the labeled proteins, which are labeled with, or sorry, the labeled vesicles are labeled with antibodies and magnetic beads. So when we
Whoa.
flow it through our chip, it has membranes with nanometer sized pores. The membranes are coated with metal.
Okay.
So we then put, so basically we put our chip into, we built an automated benchtop device. So it's a a box with a
Okay.
touchscreen interaction and syringe pumps built into the box. So you put the
Okay.
chip into the device and the chip sits on a magnet. So then you take your
Okay.
labeled sample. So we've labeled the vesicles that we're interested in with magnetic nanoparticles. And
Right.
we flow the labeled sample through our chip on that automated
Yeah.
benchtop device. And
Yeah.
then what we do is you wash everything else away. So the important part here is that we're isolating a subpopulation. So we want only the vesicles that we're interested in and not everything else. Because basically, there's tons of these vesicles in a mill of blood. It's something like 10 to the 10th or 10 to the 12th vesicles in a mill of blood. And we don't want to look at all of them or it'll look like static. It's just a lot of noise. So we're trying to isolate a specific signal. So our chip basically does a really good job at isolating those vesicles on the edges of those pores with the
Yeah.
magnetic beads, and then it gets stuck because of the presence of the magnet. So we wash everything
Gotcha.
else away. And then what we do is we lyse the vesicles open and analyze the content. So you can look at the proteins or you can look at the nucleic acids. And again, we're doing this in all of the patients in the healthy population and patients in the disease population. And we look at the signals between those two populations and see what's different.
Cool. I was wondering actually that's very cool, the chip part. The chip is sort of the mechanism by which you can study what you want to study.
Yeah, so this is a bioengineering. I guess I should have started with that. So
Yeah.
it came from a bioengineering lab. So it's very much engineering and physics based with a very strong biology application. So it really requires those things to come together.
Ugh, I love an interdisciplinary project and problem.
Yeah.
I love an interdisciplinary solution to a
Yeah,
problem.
it's been really great. I really enjoy working with engineers, especially my like employee number one, my coworker. He really specializes in building tools for biologists. So engineers just like find a problem and solve it, and it's really interesting to work with them, and it's been a cool experience.
That's awesome. That's great. So you are doing as much science as you're able to do in your role, mostly because with a small company like a startup, you have many hats. I am imagine.
Yeah, so I was
Are you enjoying it?
yeah, I do. I do really like it. And actually it's a good way to figure out what you want to do because you get to wear so many different
Mm,
hats. It's obviously hard because I have a lot of responsibilities, but I overall do really like it. I get to do a lot of different things instead of just one thing. Because I think what I do know is or I don't think that I would want to work at the bench 100% of the time, but you don't really anyway
yeah.
because you still have to plan your experiments, do your analyses. Like you're never really 100% at the bench. But I think what I've learned is that I do like getting to do some of these other things. So I'm trying to figure out like how to keep that in my career, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was employee number two, and I started
Mm,
off as a senior scientist, and then and now the head of biology. So I
oh.
definitely have taken on a lot more responsibilities since I've been there, and do get involved in a lot of different parts of the business, which is exciting.
Do you have reports?
Yeah, so I have one direct report in the lab, so a research associate, and then technically I have a direct report that's an engineer as well. So um, yeah, his title is an engineer something, one, I think.
Cool.
So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Um, do you, so you're still kind of, well, you're still trying to kind of figure out what aspects of, this job are things you want to keep in your career. Um, have you, do you think you want to pursue the industry direction? Or are there parts of that, like the fact that, you hear of people who are in industry and then they decide they want to do science, they want to go back to academia because they don't like the fact that they have to do science because of the money. Does that bother you at all?
Um, I I don't think I would go back to academia. I definitely want to stay in industry. This is like a little bit of a mix because we're an industry,
Hmm.
startup company, but we do still interact with academia. So like I do still love the parts of academia that like result in companies like this. And I love that this company
Yeah.
went or the lab before they even were a company interacted with the clinic really early. So I love that they did those patient samples. Like that was part of what drew me to this project. So um yeah, but I definitely want to stay in industry. I think it overall, I mean, it tends to move faster. Like my goal
Yeah.
is to eventually help a patient. Like I really want whatever I do to eventually
Right.
help a human. So I think the best chance that I have for doing that is to be part of an industry company in some form.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right about like just the speed too, because you can definitely see the effects of your work in industry on actual people before you would from like a research lab
Yeah.
in academia
I mean, it
stage.
depends on where, like, what part of industry you are. Because I think no matter what I'm gonna do, like, unless I get in, like, at the 11th hour, right before this, a company were to release a drug, launch a
Right.
drug, like, it's, I think that's part of what's difficult about research is the horizon is very long. So, you have to
Yes.
trust that your work that you're doing now is gonna pay off in the long run, because no matter what, it's gonna be a long run.
Yeah.
So I think it's good motivation, but it's also just something I think it is a little bit of a challenge sometimes. So and maybe there are jobs that I could do where I am closer to helping the patient. Um,
Hmm.
but we'll see.
Like a doctor.
Well, don't tempt me because I've definitely thought about it. Um,
No, I wouldn't. You are a doctor, just a different kind of doctor, right? Well, okay. So before we close out my questions, I want to ask you what, besides your work right now, what are your hobbies?
I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out because I don't really think it's fair to say that travel is a hobby because you can only do it so many times a year.
Yeah,
I am
but it's an interest. It's an interest of yours,
Yeah.
right?
So traveling, and then of course, similarly, I am scuba certified. So when I do
Oh,
travel, I love to scuba dive, but again, that's not something that I get to do super regularly. Um, Yeah, I mean, yeah, I love to travel. I do spend a lot of time down the shore, and then before we started recording, we talked about going up to Jim Thorpe. So I spent some time up in the
Mhm.
Poconos at a friend's lake house. So I love kind of traveling and doing some hiking up there. And then I've lived in Philly now for almost exactly, I guess I'm a little bit over 10 years, other than a small gap.
Mhm.
But I do really like exploring Philly, and I think especially, I mean, so I've lived in Philly for almost 10 years, but 6 of it was during grad school and almost 3 now during the pandemic. So there's still
Yeah,
so
right.
much to see in the city. So I'm trying to like actually explore the city a little bit more. Um,
As like a normal working
yeah,
professional who lives in a city.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. There's so much stuff that I hadn't done during grad school just because of the very limited amount of time that you have outside of grad school.
I know. It's so true. Um, Speaking of grad school, is there anything that you miss about that time in your life?
Not a whole lot, just because of the challenges towards the end there. It was a very stressful time, and like I was working, 7 days a week for a couple years because of the cells that I was working with. The
Yeah.
experiment that I was doing, it was a 7 day thing, and you had to overlap it
Yep.
with other ones, so it was a nightmare. But I would say probably the beginning of grad school is what, if I missed anything, it would be. I think at the beginning of grad school, you have a cool community that you're a part of. Like I really liked my cohort. We were a small cohort of 6 people. So it was fun to,
Nice.
yeah, spend time with them and yeah, just sort of the early, like, doing classes together and things like that. It was a good time, but I think it does get a little bit um, isolating as you get further into it because you just have to focus on things. And yeah, just kind of be a little bit more focused towards the end of it. So,
Do you still keep in touch with those cohort friends?
a little bit here and there, not as much again because I think it was very much so.
Have they all like spread out? Because for me, everyone's just like now in a different part of the country, and it's sad.
Yeah, we're all pretty spread. A couple of us are local-ish, and then like, well, there's only 6, so half are local-ish, and then half are further away. Yeah,
Yeah, sad.
yeah,
But it's fine. We have Zoom,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I keep in touch with a couple other people do still live in Philly from because so that's my biology graduate group cohort. But then because I was in the med school umbrella program, my lab was part of that. I have friends from
Right.
other programs, so I do keep in touch with a good number of those, and some are still in Philly, which is nice.
It's a little social butterfly. Okay, so Erica, tell me more about these hats that you wear. What kind of hats are they?
Yeah, so yeah, we're a small startup, and I get to do a lot of different things. So we have been fundraising. So I'm not the one leading the fundraising, but I am a pretty active participant. So I've gotten to pitch the company a couple times, which is a very cool experience. And then I participate in a lot of the fundraising questions, fundraising conversations to be there to ask questions. Oh my goodness, sorry, answer questions about the biology side. Although a lot of times our founder is on the calls too, and he does an excellent job at talking about the
Right.
company. So sometimes he takes over those, but it's still just a great experience to be a part of this fundraising effort. I've worked on things like the budget, strategic, like business planning. I've even gotten to be on board meetings, which is not a common thing for like employee
Even employee
employees.
too,
Yeah.
you know?
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been interesting. A little bit less in the past, like that was more common. So I've been at this company for 3 years now. So it's been a little bit less frequent lately, but that was a very cool experience. And then something that I never thought that I would do is I'm sort of like our sales and marketing and customer and product support person. And this is a part of the job
Oh.
that like some of it, the sales part is a little bit hard. So I went to a couple conferences and was trying to like recruit new customers. So that was a really cool experience. I loved getting to talk about it. But I do kind of struggle with like the sales hat. But it
Mhm.
was a really cool experience, and I'm enjoying like working with the potential customers and our customers at Penn. So I really support those projects and get to interact a lot with what are our customers. So we do sell our products to Penn, and we're trying to expand outside of Penn. So that's been
Yeah.
interesting. A bit challenge. Like I made marketing materials, like our brochure. So I guess I had some experience. Like the medical writing stuff was a really great experience
Yeah.
for that. But putting that marketing spin on it when I have no marketing experience other than that was interesting. Um, helping the engineers is a brand new experience, doing like inventory planning, and working with engineers to kind of
Mm.
understand what the production process is like so that I can help plan and support our customers again. Um, and then my main job, which is funny that I said it the last thing, but um, I think those other things are on my mind a lot just because they like the lab just kind of feels like it just fits into my everyday and is not something I have to like
Right.
actively. So doing the experiments in the labs, developing our diagnostic, looking to optimize our assays. That was what I was hired for. And the
Mhm.
first year, well, okay, so I started in September 2019. So I was only there for like, it was the end of
Mm.
September, so 4 or 5 months before the pandemic. So I was really in the lab almost every day for the first couple months. And then when the
Yep.
pandemic hit, we did shut down because Penn shut down. And
Mm.
we're very closely tied to Penn. So we closed for, I think it was about 2 months. And I did start going back into the lab once we were able. And my coworker and I just stayed isolated because we have an office and we have the lab. So like I would just go into the lab when I needed to do experiments, and then I would come home. But we started doing like I did this giant. My coworker and I did this giant competitive analysis document. So like we had some kind of pandemic projects that maybe
Yeah.
got things rolling away from the bench that I started to get more involved in. So I did go back to the bench, but again, maybe not as full time I was doing before the pandemic, because now we kind of discovered like the work from home things that we could do, and other things that I got more
Yeah.
involved in. And then we hired my research associate in a little over a year ago. So that would have been, end of 2021. And she's the one that's been really keeping the lab running. She does almost
The
all the
bench
experiments
work.
now. Yeah. And she's excellent. So I am more of like managing her projects than I am doing I try to go in. I would like to get. It's going to kind of come and go in waves. Lately, I've not
Hmm.
been getting in as much, but I'd like to try to carve out a bit of a project. I've mostly have been doing just kind of like the hey, let me try this thing, and I'll go like do
Yeah.
a fun experiment or like try to do a mini project. Because I just can't. I don't. I have other things that I can't be in the lab full time.
Yeah. Wow. It's a lot. A lot of
Yeah.
hats.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun though. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Very cool. Um,
Back to the
okay, so
questions.
yeah, back to my wrap-up
Okay.
questions. So one of my wrap-up questions is, what was something challenging you faced in your PhD, which I feel like we've kind of covered, but if there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think my PA not getting tenure is definitely the big challenge of my PhD.
That might be one of the most challenging challenges I've heard on this podcast so
Oh,
far.
great.
So,
I love having
um,
that award.
glad to have you talk about that. Because it does happen,
Well,
right? It
yeah, it's good
happens.
to know. I wish I had known more before, so I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Um, okay, so my next question is, what advice would you give to yourself in year
Other
one?
than that,
Which you may have also covered. But if you have anything to add,
yeah.
feel free.
No, I think um I mean, I don't want to discourage people from going right from undergrad to grad school. I think if you can take time to figure out what you want, you might get more out of the grad school experience, because kind of knowing what you want, like grad school is going to be what you make it. Like it's going to be whatever
Yeah.
you want to get out of it. So, if you know what you want, it might be a bit, more
Fruitful.
yeah, yeah, that's a good word. Yeah. But I would say you can also just I figured it out. You can also just go and figure it
Yeah.
out. It is a great time to go explore. I guess if you're going to do that, don't be scared to explore, because I was really intimidated when I was going in picking the research rotations. And it was just
Mm.
kind of like, so the first one that I did was a Drosophila lab. And so I felt like I had
Okay.
the intro there to say, hey, can I rotate in your lab? Um, I, so yeah, I think just go feel confident to go talk to the professors, because most of them do want rotation students unless they for some reason can't, or and they'll be honest with you. So I think exploring your options even before you get there, because I started and then we had classes right away, and I just didn't have a lot of
Yeah.
time to figure out these rotations because we had a full schedule of classes. So unless you're given a little bit more time to do that exploring, like talking to the professors, talking to other students in the lab or postdocs, I think um, might help picking your rotations. Although I will say I knew almost immediately when you start the rotation whether it's a yes or no. Like I knew within the first week in
Oh,
every single one. Maybe that's a personal experience, but I knew right away whether I
I
wanted
mean,
to join or not.
that's interesting. I feel like I've heard that before too. I didn't have rotations. We started in a
Yeah.
lab right away, but um yeah, I think that's interesting. And to anyone in department administration who's listening, that could be an interesting um I don't know, note.
Yeah.
Just the fact that it doesn't take anyone that long to decide if they
Yeah.
want to do that
I mean,
research.
maybe you could try to structure your rotation so that you actually get something out of it. If it's longer, like I think mine were 8 weeks, so if I had more time, which I didn't, I mean, we had full scheduled classes,
Right.
so there's no way I was going to get like an authorship out of an 8 week rotation. But if you can maybe structure your project a little bit so that you do get something out of it, even if you're not going to join that lab. And for
Right.
example,
That
like
makes sense.
I've heard of people that did a rotation in like a computer science lab or a bioinformatics lab, even though they knew they were going to join a lab in genetics or whatever it may be. You can do a rotation to just explore something different that you might want to bring into your project when you do join a lab. So that,
Like learn some skills.
exactly, yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
very
And I
cool.
would say my other
That's good.
piece of advice is to do something outside of your research. So like teaching, I'm really happy that I did that. I definitely in the beginning had to push for it a little bit, or I had to do it. But
Yeah.
then, your PI is never going to want you to do anything other than your research, so you have to advocate for
True.
yourself there. So like, I wish I had taken like business class or something. I
Uh
mean, now that I'm at a startup,
Now that you're in
yeah,
marketing,
right.
yeah.
Or just something, that's, an industry rotation might be something that people could consider if they don't want to stay in academia because it's not the alternate career anymore. That's like most people are going to go outside of
Yeah.
academia. So just, I think it's something to consider
And
doing something outside of just your research.
definitely ask,
Yeah.
like what's the worst that they can say is
Well,
no.
or set that expectation in the beginning before you
Oh
join.
yeah,
So,
good
like,
advice.
yeah, kind of preface it with your advisor that this is something that you definitely want to do at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Good advice. Okay, and then my last question is, do you have a good memory or story you want to share from your time in your
Yeah, I
program
had to kind of go back, like,
to to the first three
had to
years?
just forget about the bad stuff for a minute. No, because there were, I think, yeah, the first couple years, like the holiday parties were always a good time. And then that reminded
Nice.
me of a Halloween party that we did one year. So this is all like with grad students in the
Yeah.
biology program actually, and we all dressed up as Drosophila gene names. Because Drosophila
Oh
genes
my
are like
God.
really funny. So I dressed up as Skittles. So I like put on like a red thing
Oh.
and put the Skittles logo because that's a gene in flies, hedgehog, Swiss cheese. Like there's just random fruit fly
Oh my
geneticists like had a
God.
good time when they were um
Who would have known? I had no idea.
yeah, so we were total nerds and did that one year. And then a couple other retreats were really cool. So we went to the Philly Stadium for the Epigenetics Institute one year. We had a retreat at the Mutter Museum and then Skytop
Nice.
Lodge in the Poconos. So those were always a good time to get to kind of let loose a little bit and hang out with your grad students, friends, and faculty outside of just everyday research.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. And that's why I like to ask this question because a lot of times people will say, oh, it was that, one night where we, you know, left lab and we did this random thing, and it's like the memories you have with the people, not necessarily
Yeah, it's always something outside
the other
of
stuff.
lab.
Yeah.
Unless you like
Yeah.
had that one random like 11 p.m. lab night with your lab mates, which I hope,
Where you were like so tired, you were like just spewing
yeah.
nonsense. Yeah.
One time it snowed so heavily in Philly and I had to go, we were doing protein extraction, which is like a 16-hour day, and I had to get there at
Oh,
like 6 a.m. something like that, crazy early. Well, for me, crazy early. And like trudging in
hmm.
a foot of snow, walking to campus. I'm like, this is supposed to be the snow day where we stay home. I don't know how my PI and the scientists like got into work that day because I had to trudge
Yeah.
through the snow.
Wow. Yeah, I read something recently that was like at every PhD student at some point during their time. says to themselves, I'm just gonna open a coffee shop.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I had that thought many times.
I don't drink coffee and somehow finished my PhD without having coffee. So maybe not coffee,
I don't
but
either.
I think we deserve an extra little badge if you got through grad school without coffee. Maybe like a
I
bookstore or
agree.
something. A beach.
Yeah, well, people will always ask me, they would be like, you don't drink coffee? And I was like, yeah, I was sort of like, I didn't need it. And I was like, while I was writing my dissertation, if I needed it, I would do it. And I don't really like it. And but I didn't do it. And now here we
Yeah,
are.
I just never really liked it. And then I was like, I probably could like it, but it would be, for the creams and sugars. So I'm just not even gonna start.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Wow, that's great. I've never met anyone
Not
else
many
like
of
that.
us.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Well, that is all my questions, Erica. Do you have anything you want to say or plug? Are you releasing a product or publishing a paper or writing a book anytime soon?
Yeah, I guess we are kind of recruiting early adoption customers for our products. So if any of that
Nice.
sounded interesting, isolating subpopulations of extracellular vesicles, we are looking to get involved with some more research groups, or get into other industries like pharma and things like that. So if anybody has any interest there. That's kind of the work side. And then for like plugging, just if anybody wants to chat about things, happy to talk to anybody about, startups, medical writing, PhD, Penn and Philly things. Just love talking about this stuff. So this was a very cool opportunity.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll check in a little bit, see what you're up to.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to.
Thanks to Erica for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.